is that on the slanted face, we'll have the city seal and the words, "This monument is erected to, in memory of the Poquoson watermen who perished working on the water." Now, not all the watermen, but those that actually perished working the water. And we have, to date, 33 names that would fit on the flat part of the face. And this thing would weigh about 3,800 pounds and sit on a concrete footing. So it's not going to go anywhere. And I hope to get the quote for this by tomorrow or the next day. He said by the first of the week, so I think we can definitely possibly get it done for the amount of donations that were done for the watermen. And I will reconvene those that are left that were on the original committee to get their blessing, and we can move forward.
Roughly what are the dimensions? I mean, is it like 4 or 5 feet?
It will be
roughly
from the bottom of the granite monument to the top will be 5 feet. It will be 4 feet wide, and it'll be 12 inches thick at the base. And then once you get past the flat part with the names, it slopes where the seal will go and the words, and when it gets to the top, it'll be about 6 inches thick.
Okay.
Is there any, I guess the purpose of a work session is to kind of get agreement and then see it formally. So is there anybody that disagrees with that concept or wants to go there? No. Okay. So I see a consensus to go in that manner. So next we'll talk about clock. And again, Dave, I don't want to underplay this because I'll tell you, I appreciate the fact that you started making us think again. Because this money was just drifting in the budget. And there are donations for a lot of it, and we needed to put it to use and not just hold on to people's money. With that being said, Jana had one thing she wanted to be said since she's not going to be here this evening. And Randy, I'll let you share that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I got a call from Councilwoman Andrews earlier today, and she asked me to convey to you that in her feedback that she's received from the citizens that she's reached out to, she's not received any support for the clock, but she has received support for other uses of that money that either might be a higher usefulness or of a higher priority to the individual citizen. So it wasn't, we shouldn't do anything with it, and it just didn't seem to be the priority based on the comments that she'd received. She asked me to convey that.
All right. So I basically threw it out on the floor, told y'all be prepared to come and talk about it this evening, is saying, okay, we've been talking about, and I see one of the major gaps in this community is our ability to communicate with citizens, okay? And that can be during storms, it can be during just regular occurrences, and that's why I had suggested, and we've kind of made some baby steps in that manner on the middle school, moving to an electronic sign ordinance that allows us to communicate what goes on at the school with people, with the parents. So building on that, I thought that replacing that sign out front, which we've talked about before, might be a good use for this money. Is there anybody that would prefer the clock over the sign?
Just my conversation about that. First off, I really appreciate the efforts that Dave Huck's made coming up with the idea of the clock and keeping it alive, because when the old clock was taken down at the corner of With Creek Road in Little Florida, that clock was dearly missed. Everybody wanted to know what time it was and what the temperature was. And so, although it was just a clock, it was important to many, many people. I heard a lot of comments about that. Having the sign for storm events, for special events within the city, our seafood festival, events that may happen in the school, having the ability to do that, make that sign where it's easily visible and not having to have Dave Callis or one of his employees out there standing in the rain under an umbrella posting letters on it, okay?
Out of a cardboard box.
Out of a cardboard box, I think is a phenomenal idea. And in talking with Councilman Hux, he doesn't mind. He thinks the idea of the clock is still a good idea, but it's my understanding that this clock will have the ability to display time and temperature. Okay? And so we will still have a time and temperature display for our citizens. We'll also have a up-to-date way to communicate with the citizens, so I think that's a good idea.
Councilman Hux, let's hear from you.
I know 10 years ago there was support for a clock in the form of the Heritage Park to the tune of $18,000 and some odd dollars. I thought it was a good idea at the time, so I used this opportunity to suggest that again for consideration. And the way this process has worked, since that idea was thrown out on the table, it has stimulated thought and input from others, and I think we went from a good idea to a better idea, and I think the idea of the electronic sign is a better idea than just the clock. As Councilman Southall stated, that'll tell us time and temperature. It also gives us the opportunity to have a communication device in the event of an impending storm, or in particular in the aftermath of a hurricane when most of the city may be without power. That would give us the opportunity to communicate vital information that people may not have access to. So with all that being said, I support the concept of the electronic sign.
We'll have backup power on it, so we can run it when the rest of the city's out.
The workup that Mr. Callis did, the 54,000 and some change, does not have that. I talked to him earlier today, and he estimated the cost of rigging it so you could plug one of our generators into it, and no more than $1,500. We think within the contingency based within this budget, if you approve this budget, we should be able to do that. But specifically, it was not priced, but that's the relative cost. And if you say yes to the clock, to the electronic sign, we will find a way within the budget, or within one of my department's budgets, to make that happen additionally.
No, I think that's a good point. It does need to be something that we can count on during power outages, and but I'm not looking to overcomplicate it either. I think we'll probably find that a handheld generator will probably power the computer and the LEDs.
Shouldn't be much.
So,
Okay, and just a further comment on that, the backup power is a good idea, certainly that it is. I don't think, if that comes in too cost prohibitive, I don't think that's a killing item for the clock, because in the event of a storm, something like that, most of the time, this area of the city still has power, but should it not have power, people are not going to get in their cars and drive up Wood Creek Road, okay, to in front of the city hall to see the messages on the sign. Okay, so
I disagree with that. During Isabel, people drove to the corner by B.C. Smith's store in Huntsneck to read that red spray paint on that piece of plywood.
they did?
Yes,
Okay,
I was one of them.
very good.
yes, sir.
I thought I read somewhere in the communication that the backup was going to be a solar panel, and it was included. I read that somewhere.
It may be. I would just say that I think all the staff needs to know is that we wanted to run
Right.
the solar power. I agree that the power draw on these machines is not very much, and I think we can accommodate whatever that is. I just don't want us to be thinking we're going to route power lines from the diesel back here on the city hall all the way out there. That's a little cost prohibitive, but I think it can be done, and if it can't be done, we'll re-engage.
But there are several other reasons why the electronic sign is a good idea, because I know from the mobile food pantry or food bank that sometimes Dave has to make the decision as to what message to put on that current board. And with this sign, you can put multiple messages and do it remotely, and like Bud said, they won't be out there in the rain or the heat changing the letters, and I think it's a great idea and a way to communicate with the citizens.
And you can do a message about every 30 seconds if you want to. And that's what that sign would do.
So basically what I'm hearing is basically, unless there's, somebody else has something, I'm hearing them get something.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, I think it's a great idea too, and I do think it's something citizens would appreciate. But I do think we, and I know staff will consider this, but I think we need to do what we can do within this project to bring cost back within that number we've given ourselves, that $37,373. This is $17,000 more dollars than the money we originally agreed on, throwing at this project. So I think it's a good idea, but I do think if there's somewhere in this project we can get back in that budget, we need to do it.
If possible, I'm sure that Randy will do that. If not, then we'll make the decision at that time.
Well, the option for the 5-year financing is
Yeah.
a great way to go.
Exactly.
I have proposed that on equipment even,
Yep.
that's what we ought to do.
That's why I say, I think we'll leave it up to staff how to fit us in the budget, and then we'll make that decision at that time. So what I'm hearing is a consensus then to move forward with the sign versus the clock. That's really it as far as the funding requests now for community development. I know that that we have received a letter from the museum asking for something. It's I know we also have them on our agenda for tonight to fund part of their need for moving the building. I think we owe a deeper conversation. I'll ask Randy to set up a meeting between us and the museum folks in the coming weeks to talk about longer range issues that they might have. So, with that said, I think that's really the first agenda, unless I'm missing something here, the first item on the work session. Okay. All right, let's go on to the sign ordinance.
Okay.
And we'll keep going. I'm going to grab a cup of coffee. Yes, sir.
You ready? Go right ahead, Wally.
Thank you. The reason we're here tonight for this particular item is that,
Wally. Key your mic, please.
I forget that every time. Okay, the reason we're here tonight is that not only does our comp plan mention the sign ordinances as up for review, but on January 28, 2019, Councilman Hux stated in the comp plan that there's a list of tasks to be completed, one of which is a revision to the city sign ordinance. And I'm reading this for the benefit of the folks at home. He requested a consensus of City Council to recommend that the city manager and staff complete the review and revision of the sign ordinance, and Council affirmed this recommendation. City Manager Randy Wheeler advised Council there are a few fixes that need to be made to the ordinance, and that city-owned property and all other properties would be separated into two ordinances. So in the intervening time, staff has acted to make that a reality. What we've got currently in the ordinance, or in our code, is we actually have two sections that deal with signs. One of them is Chapter 6 in the city code, and one of them is Appendix D, known as the sign ordinance. The idea is to make clear that Appendix D, the sign ordinance, is going to apply to private property, whereas Chapter 6 will apply to public lands, particularly right-of-ways, is what we're here to discuss tonight. We chose Chapter 6 first because there has been some issues with signage placed in the right-of-ways, and we wanted to get out in front of that. And then, of course, we'll go back to Appendix D as time goes on. If I could summarize the four questions which are included behind the memo, it's a page entitled Questions for Discussion at Work Session. But if I could summarize them, it would be, number one, whether temporary signs should be permitted in the right-of-ways at all. Certainly in some locations, they're not permitted at all. I realize that, we may not want to go that far, but that is an option on the table. What the size limit should be, to give you an idea of what we currently have in our sign ordinance for signs in the right-of-way. Not only are they temporary signs, but they can only be 4 square feet in size, and they can only be 3 feet above grade. So obviously, a lot of signs that we've seen in the right-of-way in the past have exceeded this, and I actually gave you 3 examples of past signs in the question sheet. So again, when we go down this process, we want to make sure that we are reflecting what the actual desire is as far as regulating signs in the right-of-way. We also have prohibited intersections. Are we happy with those intersections, or should we add City Hall and Victory Boulevard as a prohibited intersection? Welcome, Bonnie. And
My apologies. I didn't know the protocol, so we've asked the members of the Planning Commission.
well, I
Parks
started
Board
talking
to join
before
us.
she was here. So my bad. So yeah, distance from intersections too is another thing that's not spelled out in our current ordinance, Chapter 6. We've proposed 100 feet. It could be less, it could be more. The idea being that if you've got Whiff Creek, Little Florida, and Victory, that intersection right there, if that's a prohibited intersection, how far back do you want to go to prohibit any signs in the right-of-way? 100 feet sounded like a pretty good number, so.
And 100 feet is what we've been using.
Right.
As a rule of thumb.
Yes.
And so we'll come back through the questions.
Yes,
We'll just
absolutely.
summarize them.
Absolutely. Whether there should be a ban on temporary signs in the right-of-way in certain areas or zoning districts, such as residential or residential uses. So those are the 4 main questions. The memo is quite long and includes a lot in it, but I think that's really what we're here for tonight. And so, we want to, like I said, just to reiterate, staff wants to write an ordinance that the city council, and I know we're going to get a wide diversion of views tonight, and that's fine, but the idea is to sort of fuse that together into something that everybody can hopefully buy into.
Mr. Mayor, if I could.
Yes, sir.
Council members, you'll recall we have had discussions about the sign ordinance at various times during my tenure, and it never gets very far, in part because of the commingling of the ordinances between sort of private property and public property, and also because we very quickly go into the weeds from the forest. So what Wally and Dannon have done, and they've given you a document behind this that sort of walks those ordinances. They've reconciled, they've taken the public stuff and put it in one place. They have fixed it where it was inconsistent in a way that we think is not a policy shift. And then we have 4 big questions. With your input, they'll draft a revised ordinance, which will then go to the Planning Commission and go through the whole formal process, including public hearing, and come ultimately to you. So we're not asking for your decisions today, we're asking for your input on 4 key question areas, because at the end of the day, we want to have an ordinance that reflects the city council's views, and we want to vigorously enforce it.
Yes.
And we've had difficulties with that, and this is a way of, at some level, if you give this comment, just take it for what it's worth. We don't really care so much what's in the ordinance, as long as it's what you want us to enforce, and then we will go and enforce it. But we have difficulties enforcing the ordinance because our past practices have deviated from our ordinances, and as some of you that have been around even almost as long as I have. You remember, we started with 3 ordinances that conflicted with one another. We're down to 2, and we'd like to get to 0. And so your input is really important to us so that we can bring you back an ordinance that will at least begin being shaped by your views on these important questions.
Okay.
Fair enough?
Absolutely, absolutely, well said.
So the first question is, does the city council want to allow temporary signs in the public right-of-way? Recognizing that that's a choice.
Yeah.
And it's not uniform in Virginia, it's not required, it's a choice, and we've traditionally allowed it.
Wally, just one
Yes, sir.
question before we jump in. Right now, the temporary signs like the ones you have listed, the Back River, the Poquoson Youth Football, the Volunteer Rescue Squad,
Yes, sir.
is there any time frame contingency? And how long can they keep the temporary sign up right now?
Well, typically, in our ordinance in Chapter 6, we allow a very short window for them to be up. I think it's,
One of the things that you'll see, Councilman Canella, is in one of the weeds is reconciling. In one ordinance, it said 48 hours.
Right.
And the others, it was a month.
That's why I'm
So-
a little confused.
We're suggesting
we're
a month.
thinking a month.
So we enforce the month right now on temporary signs?
Yeah, try and keep it back to where,
We
at the
do
high
try.
level.
We try.
Okay,
Well, what the simple answer is, we don't want to argue whether it's 48 hours or whether it's
right.
a month.
Yeah.
What we really want to say is, do we want to regulate it within the public right-of-way?
Right, and I would say, just to follow up, Mr. Canella, on those signs that are mentioned in here, they're gone now, but they were put up without benefit of any permit at all, those particular ones. Now, some of them are permitted, and we'll permit them really based on prior practice, but we'd like to get away from that and actually enforce
Okay, so
an ordinance.
I guess I'll start just by throwing my own opinion on the table, and then y'all can chew it up. I'm used to being wrong anyway, so I do have to go home, and I'll hear how wrong I was. But that being said, I think we should allow signs in the public right-of-way. But I think that they should have to adhere to certain standards and certain time limits. That's my gut feel, and that they have to be from an organization that is recognized, I guess, so to speak. In other words, I really don't want to see a sign that says, hey, or take on state or national politics, with ugly signs that basically attack people. Okay, so as long as we can control that, I am good with.
I don't believe you can.
Control that.
That's what I was going to get at,
If
is
political
that,
signs cannot be controlled
I'm
if
not-
you allow signs.
I'm not talking about political signs. If you want to run for office, run for office.
Yeah.
If you want to attack people, do it face to face.
there have been several cases that have come before the courts, probably Gilbert versus Arizona being the main one,
Yep.
where basically it's been stated that you're essentially going to allow signs, you can't really regulate the content of the sign. So the question really becomes, and it's number one, to elaborate, does the city want temporary signs in the right-of-way regardless of what the message is? Because there's decency laws, I guess, but essentially you're not regulating the content.
What you will see, though, Mayor, in response to your comment, in the line and out version, section 6-114, proposed additional language that talks about signs, and they'll pick up the underlined section, or signs advocating for a candidate during an election or for position regarding a public vote on an issue. That is our attempt to define what a political sign is.
Without actually saying what it is.
Okay.
Yeah, we get around to it.
So that's my throw it on the table. I guess you're looking for some type of us to say, do most people agree with it?
I agree with Gene up to the point where we can't control content, but allowing them, yes.
Yes, I support the mayor, and I also like the 100-foot back. Thank you, Councilman Canella. Yeah, my apologies. I do like the idea of the 100-foot distance back from the intersection as well.
Okay.
I think that's reasonable. Thank you.
Wally,
Yes,
just one question. Where did the 4 square feet, where did that come from?
That's a good question. I can't answer that question exactly,
we don't
except
know.
to
It's in your
say it's
existing ordinance.
pre-existing.
But we don't know where that
Yeah.
We do
number
not.
came from?
We do not.
But it's in the county code currently,
Yeah.
under chapter 6.
I pretty much agree. I do think, just looking at the signs you've listed here as examples, I think 4 feet I think that's ridiculous. 4 square feet, rather.
It's pretty small.
That's not very large. And the signs we probably see the most being the ones you listed, I don't really get complaints about it being too big. I'm good with the 100 square feet 100 feet from the intersection. But I would just say, maybe changing that to 20 square feet and 3 feet above the grade, if that's what you've got. Everything else I'm fine with.
If I can, I'd like to chime in on that briefly. 4 square feet is pretty small. You can't put a whole lot on it. And that's one of the reasons we're talking about going to the electronic sign versus the manual sign that we have now, is so we can communicate effectively. So I would support something a little bit bigger than 4 square feet.
Bonnie, we'll leave that one up to the planning commission. And y'all horse through that, and I'm sure y'all will have a great debate about how big is too big. But I certainly agree with what's being said here. 2 foot by 2 foot's too small. How big is too big? Okay, so, all right?
Sure. That's why I put these signs here for reference.
Gotcha.
Because some of them are really big and some of them
And they're ones you're used to seeing, so.
I think we can use those as guides.
What about the time issue, Wiley, between the 48 hours and the month?
We've advocated a month, because really, if you're going to put up a sign, if you're going to have an event like sign-ups or cheerleading or whatever it might be, you're going to have more than a 48-hour window.
If I can just chime in on that.
Go ahead.
Wally pointed out that when you permit the signs in the right-of-way, you're not going to be able to control the speech.
Got it. Understand it.
If I could, here to re-prompt the discussion, as council was reminded, there are 4 intersections in which signage within the intersection is prohibited now, and we have suggested 100 feet to quantify what has been our practice, and that seems to be okay. But don't want to lose the fact that we're also suggesting the addition of the intersection of City Hall Avenue and 50 Boulevard as the 5th intersection to prohibit signs within 100 feet. Are you all comfortable with that?
Yes.
That will cut down the area that we see a lot of temporary signs going up in, so.
And then the last section, the last question, is Wally points out, temporary signs are permitted in the right-of-way in every zoning district. And I'm going to come back to one other point, but, and that's fine if that's your continuing intention. If you look around the community, sometimes you'll see a sign pop up, and it's kind of like mushrooms. All of a sudden, you get 5 or 6 more. And my point being that it is okay if you decide that you don't want it in a specific zoning district. We can control by zoning district as well as intersection blocks or whatever. And sort of the other point I want to come back to, our other practice, which I don't believe is in this draft ordinance, is as a general rule, we have tried real hard not to have signs from the signpost back to city limits. That is not in our ordinance. It used to be on a form.
You're talking about from the city of Poquoson sign back to
The signpost.
the signpost.
The future home of the electronic sign.
Yes. In other
We
words, you
have-
don't want.
By practice, by our old forms, we told people that they couldn't do that. But there is nothing in our ordinance that backs that up, so we had to back off of that when we.
Well, it does, I think we should basically add that to it, and, because I don't want to be thinking, people be thinking that we are endorsing any particular group or again versus another. So I think that's a reasonable request, that it can't be near the, welcome to the City of Poquoson sign or the new City of Poquoson sign, you know, give us some setback from that so nobody thinks it's our sign.
Is that okay? Everybody generally all right with that? Obviously, you're going to get a complete another shot at this. But I think you've given us the feedback necessary to draft an ordinance so that the planning commission can begin the process.
And Bonnie, I wish you luck. So I've seen this whole exercise 3 or 4 times, and, you know, and it's all well-meaning, and it's very difficult. And Randy, I will be the first one to say, you've taken us a long ways. I'm sorry, Dave, but let me finish my thought, and then I will give it to you. Well, what I would say is, you've made great strides going from basically 3 ordinances to 1. So that's a big win, okay, and really appreciate the hard work that it's taken to do that, because all of this is well-meaning, and there will be people that I'm sure that will not like what the final version is, and there will be a way to change that if there's something that we haven't thought about. But it is really for the general improvement of our, one, for communication and to do it so that it's the same for everybody. And that what I would really like to see, if there's any way possible, that we talk about business signs in the residential sections. I'm not sure that on public property, that having another invitation to go join a gym somewhere, right, is something that we want to allow. If it's you know, come sign up for this or that, but is there any way to control that legally, or?
I would say, as far as signage in the right of ways, you can't regulate the contents of someone.
Okay. But they still have to come through the city, and can we regulate the content by saying, putting you on a approved list? I'm not saying you can't get on it, but is there a way? Because
I don't
one
think
of the
so.
chief complaints I've got is, you know, I want to buy your home today, right?
Well,
or I want to sell you a gym membership.
Yeah, and then we sometimes take those signs down.
Right.
They don't typically get permits.
Correct.
So when we see them, we have been known to pick them up and,
That's because of the permit.
well,
And that's all I'm trying to say. Is that the way we control it?
I think that if you want to have one of those signs at your property, and you want to put it on your
on the
private
private
property, there are a different set of rules, and that is another ordinance. And
Got
when we're
that.
done with this one, we'll bring the private property ordinance. But that's kind of why I was
I
talking about.
recognize the difference. If I'm getting a new roof on my house and the contractor says, I'd like to advertise that I'm the one doing it on your property, that's, to me, that is business as usual. It's just the ones that get popped up 10 or 12 in a row on Little Florida Road.
Right.
Right? And it's normally selling something, right? And that's the ones that I would like to see if there's a way to control it. I know I'm making you uncomfortable, but I'm just going to say what I'm looking for. I didn't say it's possible. All right.
I don't think we can control the content, but we certainly can control unpermitted signs.
Yeah, if that's the way we do
And
it.
A lot of those real estate signs that are put in the right of way, or the directional signs, say, you know, own for sale down here, you know. If those are in the right of way, we can pull them.
Okay, well, that's something that, and that's why this ordinance is so different.
One of the things that this ordinance, back in the weeds, is streamlined ways for us to do that.
Yeah.
The cumbersome processes to deal with some signs, is really, it's almost as if it was designed so we would never use it. So this makes it much easier. If it's not permitted, we pick it up, we throw it away.
Got it. Okay. I'm going to defer back to Councilman Hux, who had a comment, and I cut him off.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think Mr. O'Connell had a comment. I'm interested in what he had to share with us.
That was all right. I just wanted to add, basically, besides the fact of content regulation and making us comply with that Supreme Court ruling, the reason why we are doing this is to harmonize these ordinances which contain language which contradicts each other, as well as language in our permits which isn't in the ordinance, and language in the ordinance which we don't usually enforce. The reason why we're doing this, and the regulations you have in your council packets are in part written by myself and also Wally, to basically comport with what we're doing right now, with the regulations that we applied to temporary signs in the right-of-way. But the end result of this is going to be that we are going to have the temporary sign in the right-of-way regulation, and then everybody else gets the sign ordinance. And it'll make permitting a lot simpler, and it'll make enforcing it a lot simpler.
Wally, the one other thing I'm looking at here and looked at the other day when we got our packet is this fifth point here under the signs requirement permits. Signs advertising, garage or yard sale, all that. And then it says yard sale signs they have to be obtained from Community Development Department. I'm sure there's a good reason that's in here, but I just see that being a headache for staff when somebody has their yard sale or garage sale sign taken down and they don't, then we say, well, you got to go to this office and set it to get an approved garage sale sign. Just my thought.
The issue there, I understand what you're saying, is this whole ordinance is difficult to enforce. But by having a common sign, we know then at a glance that that's not an approved sign. Because many of these garage sales and other things, they happen over the weekend when we're not open, and they're a 48-hour signed event sometimes. This way, we'll know exactly which ones have a permit and which ones don't, so we can pull the other ones down and not inadvertently take down something that was permitted, and that was, I think, really the only reason for it.
The reason why that language is in there is because, again, it reflects our current practice. We have a separate yard sale permit, and we issue people usually with 2 yard sale signs that they can fill out. I brought an example. It looks like this. You get 2 of these. And that was simply updating the language to reflect what we currently do.
And do we, just current practice, do we charge for that? Or do we just give them away?
I think it's $5 for the permit.
For the permit and both signs.
For the permit. Okay. Again, Bonnie, I wish you luck.
Since Keith, we ought to hear from him. Mr. Fye,
You got anything?
would you like to comment since you're at the table?
I was just going to ask the question if there was a cost for it, and if each of the signs have identification as to who put them up. I mean, that's a simple way to figure out when it doesn't get put down, is if there's not a name or address or a phone number on the back, you just up and it goes, without having you to trace back who it belongs to and where it goes.
No, it's a good suggestion. In other places I work, we actually had a decal that you got that you stuck on your sign, and we knew exactly. So, something to think about. Thank you.
It's a good, I think those are going to be the hardest ones, and those are going to be the ones that bring the most emotion to the table. Will be if we picked up somebody's garage sale sign.
Any other question? This only applies to private signs. The Seafood Fest sign can still go at the entrance to the city, because it's more than 4 foot.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I said. We'll. I was going to suggest that that we look at the existing signs as our guide, right? And then I think those represent what I consider to be closer to the maximum size that we're looking for, and maybe we can take a survey of what they all look like and see if that, we can get to that. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, and we'll close this out and move right to a regular session.